Well, welcome everybody to this very exciting episode for me because I have two people with me that I both consider sort of new friends in my life and people that I'm getting to know better each time we tap in. But it feels like we all share a passion and a love that we are very, very excited about. And the way that I would phrase that, if you can see on Nico's screen, he just brought it to life in his background. The way I would phrase that is a regenerative village, or sometimes I call them a metamodern regenerative village, to sort of differentiate them from maybe the old school intentional communities of the 60s and 70s that were more like the hippie communes, perhaps. And so Nico's been working on a couple of projects. I don't want to dive into all the details now, but one of them is called La Tierra, which is probably the closest thing that I've personally seen that's made me say like, oh yeah, that's the place where I want to live. Like that's the place where I would actually move and plant my hands into the soil and bring it to life, and potentially want my children to grow up there. And so that's something that I'd love to dive into and explore with you. And Nicole is working on a number of projects. She has a company called Serenity. And let's see, this must have been 2 years ago now. I worked with Nicole to help come up with finding some different eco-villages and different communities around the world that would be a good place for me specifically. And so it was like eco-village matchmaking is perhaps how I would describe it. And I'd be curious to hear more about how you would phrase it. And I found it just really, really helpful because the way that she was able to speak with me to understand my needs, my desires, my wishes, my dreams, my contributions, my gifts, and then to basically like search the entire globe, all of planet Earth, to find the few places that might be the best pick for my soul and my specific longings. So that process was like just super inspiring for me. And it's something that I feel like I do informally with people all the time. I kind of have like an internal psychological weaving of all these different places that I've heard of, and there's like an internal map, and then I'll just kind of like things will just sort of channel through in the moment with different people. But Nicole's actually made that into a full company and offering, and a service that she's able to offer other people, which is super, super exciting. So that's my like very brief I guess, touch points in for both of you, but I'd love if you just took a moment each to describe yourself, how you might want to be described, and if there's any important parts of your lives that I missed, and maybe also where you're based right now and something that feels particularly alive or exciting for you in this moment. Do you want to start, Nico?
Okay, I can start. When people ask me what I do, I usually describe myself as an ontological designer. Ontological design is this science that studies that through design we can change how we feel and how we think. And I always like say, jokingly but not, that we're all ontological designers. All the time we're trying to design how we feel through our environment. We look for like apartments with more light. We look for places that foster connection. We go to co-working spaces or cafes to work, to feel surrounded by others and inspired. We get together and change the lights and the music to just feel a certain way. And I do believe that, we're in a time in which we need a lot more of this, and we need our spaces to architect our minds. And so I think one of the reasons that I do what I do is because I feel designing villages and spaces and experiences allows us, or will allow us, to just somehow help and structure better ways of interacting with ourselves, with others, and with our environments. And for me, eco-villages are, I remember it was like probably in the middle of the pandemic, and I was trying to think what, in this transitional state of the world and in which we are, where it might seem like the world is, things are really bad, but I think it's just a symptom of a world collapsing and a new world emerging, and in this like overlap in which we will need to rethink almost everything. I remember a quote from Buckminster Fuller that used to say that everybody should be a trim tab. And a trim tab is the smallest part of a plane or a ship. It's like, what's at the, it's like very tight bottom that you use to actually set course of a gigantic ship, or in the planes is the flaps. And so it's the smallest part of a system that has the greatest impact. And so I just sat down to think, well, what can I do? What can I do with my skills? And to me, an eco village is just a compendium of all the things that we will need in new societies, right? They redefine the relationship with the environment, they foster community and communitas and the shared experience. They create within them rituals and experiences that allow you to rethink how we live and how we connect with each other. It's architecture, is experience, is senses, is all of it. And so I think they can very well be blueprints for redefining all layers of society, from cities to communities. And so that's why I'm interested in this. And my ultimate goal is to help and support the buildup of as many of these eco villages as we can in the next 10 years. And I'm committed to that.
Thank you. What about you, Nicole?
Well, so I put the three of us, Tucker, Nico, and myself, in a group chat called Village Designers, because that's what I see ourselves doing. We design, we consult, we inform the process of creating regenerative villages. And in my process, in my journey in this space, it started about 9 years ago when I was 19 and I was in a meditation retreat, and I just had this like deep sense of like I need to create an institute and a community space for more intentional living. And along the way, it sort of married with my sustainable outlook on life, which was upgraded as I start to learn more about emerging patterns in regeneration and whole systems thinking and decentralization, and getting inspired by that. My background is actually in anthropology, and I'm a self-taught designer. So it's been about 6 years since I've just been a complete eco-village nerd, researching, documenting, cataloging, and synthesizing different resources, case studies, and facts about eco-village life that I found along the way. I had a pretty normal life working in a native habitat restoration project. And I was like, I need more. I want to live in community. And so I left that and started traveling, visiting, and living in different intentional and sustainable communities in Mexico and Costa Rica. And then this past year, actually, before that, I had founded the project that you mentioned, Serenity, which is obviously the combination of the word like terra and serenity, like finally achieving some sort of harmonic relationship with ourselves and with the planet, which is the principle that I think that we're all striving towards. And like after that, on those journeys, it evolved, and I got involved with a startup called Regenerative, and that is more focused on like regenerative startup societies, where everything from village or neighborhood scale, microcity scale, to micronation and network states. We're really sort of going in the direction of working with infiltrating the network state and the cloud country movement to infuse regenerative ideals into these new countries, new cities, new territories that people are building and designing. So that's what I'm really inspired by right now, this concept of startup society, because that's what we're doing, right? Like that's what Nico does. He's redesigning society like at a local scale. He's being that trim tab. And so that is where my heart is going and where my mind is going right now. I've been really lucky to basically be a researcher and a co-founder for that project, and have been rededicating myself to all of the Serenity endeavors as well recently.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. So I imagine that most people listening to this are already well aware and well established in the ecological crises, the various meta crises, all the challenges of modern society. So I don't think we need to harbor too much on that. But one of the things that even a lot of my very close friends that share, in theory, at least a desire to live in these types of new communities, it still feels like one of the main challenges, at least in my social spheres, is that there's a really almost borderline cynical kind of connotation with eco villages or with community. And I think a lot of this comes from the flood of Netflix shows that we have about all the different cults and all the different eco villages gone awry and all of this stuff. And so what I'm curious about is maybe like how, and I'm sure that we've all experienced that firsthand, being at some of these communities and seeing the frustrating processes of communication and the lack of coherence. And you're like, y'all have been around for 20 years and you still don't have like a solid process for this. How is that possible? And so for sure, there's a lot of truth in all of those perspectives that a lot of people point to. But I think that the challenge with the cynicism is that it often is overlooking the magic, and it's overlooking the like really fundamentally different way in which people are living and being and relating to each other, to the planet, to a sense of meaning and purpose in life. And so I would love to invite both of you to this, maybe speak a little bit to the most beautiful, the most aspirational, like your deepest heart's longing for what your vision is for community life. And what does that look like? What does that feel like? Almost if you could like describe it to someone, like describing a painting to a blind person or describing sound to someone who can't hear. Like what is the vision that you hold in your heart that keeps you so passionate about this work?
You go first, Nicole.
I'll go first. It's funny that you mention that because I have a friend who's currently building a regenerative village in the UK, and she says that she loves community but hates people. I was like a very introverted person. I think people who have genuinely experienced community know that it can be such deep medicine. On a very primitive biological sense of being a social creature and experiencing tribalism, to the opposite spectrum of growing and reaching your highest potential together. I think it just meets so many of our deepest needs, and what I've like personally experienced, even if it's just in a co-living situation, but also like in an eco village where people are like constantly developing themselves together. It's this really rare feeling of being held and being seen by people that I just don't think you can get in the really disconnected version of society. And there are trade-offs. Like if you are a hyper individualistic person and you don't want to have to take in consideration the feelings of anyone, like sure, maybe don't live in community. I don't think that it's for everyone, but I think we also have misconceptions around ways communities can look. It can look like 7 friends renting a house in an urban space and like creating community. So community is this like really broad umbrella term, and it can manifest in particular ways. The intention, a part of intentional community, is that you're uniting around shared ideals. And for me, like my ideals are living a life that doesn't cause other people or other beings or the planet harm. And for me, like there are so many ways that I envision it, that the daydreams come and the different designs that I've put down for communities. And these, regenerative startup societies, in that I really just, and I was telling Tucker about this earlier, like I just want to live in a place where I'm in nature and have a butterfly farm and be very unproblematic and be surrounded by other individuals who are highly dedicated to self-growth and expansion, and are other community creators that are wanting to accelerate what I see as one of the most important social movements of our time, which is regeneration, and paying attention to that. and our responsibility to regenerate the planet. So, I mean, in very practical senses, that looks like living in nature with people I really love in beautiful organic spaces, like no right angles or just nothing but round and like incredible architecture, of which we have like so much access to. Growing our own food, sourcing our own energy, filtering our own water, and being fully circular in our consumption patterns. Like it's really simple to me, and that could look a number of ways in the specific activities or lifestyle things that we do. Like obviously being a plant-based person, I prefer to be in a place where we're not like slaughtering animals all the time, but like I'm open to sharing space and living with people of like diverse doctrines and just making a space where we are like challenging really entrenched paradigms and power dynamics, and we're wanting to innovate in areas of diversity, areas of distributed power. That's the ultimate. What about you, Nico? Because you are building it. You are building it. So the vision for that.
This is such a loaded question. I'm always like, I always fear this one because it's the most complex one. And um, I'll say this first for context. I think one of the biggest problems that we've had in building anything community-based new in the last decades is that we've tried to reinvent things too fast. And the reality is like, we had tribes that had a size in which it was almost possible to have common public agreements that would foster community in a way that worked for everybody, because we based those agreements mostly on mythos, on like having a common belief or things that the tribe believed in that would mark the way that we behaved socially. These role, and when once that mythos disappeared, shifted to religion, and so now religion was the one marking the social agreements. But at the same time, societies started to structure differently, to grow and to structure in cities, and so we somehow started to socially lean towards a more individualistic approach, where like instead of like living in the tribe and sharing our resources, suddenly we were like building nations with cities or towns in which each person had their own individual thing. And so there started to be a more differentiated approach between the public and what's public and the private, right? And I think that this is the big differentiator in the last like 1,000 or 2,000 years that we've lived, that has redefined how we live and how we operate. And so whatever attempt we make at downsizing this from like nations to cities to towns to villages, which is, it seems to be like the size of something that we can kind of like grasp, in which we can have some broader common agreements for the public part of it, and somehow injecting there a little bit of new mythos and new rituals that would allow us to kind of like also put the private part a little bit out there, and have some common agreements in how we also manage that together. Uh, Within this, we cannot again reinvent the wheel too fast. And if we try, like we even say that it's not used to like, sharing and ritual together and communitying together. And so it's a process. And so for me, what I envision is a first a transitional state where we're not like we're trying to build things that already exist, just a little better. And so let's build villages where like we still have this big differentiation between the public and the private, except that the public parts were redesigning a little better, and we're doing a little bit of ontological design. And the same way that we used to have cities that put a lot of effort into having a lot of public parks and like in buildings that were no more than 2 stories, so we could have a livable environment even if they were private. And we've lost a lot of that in the last decades. So I think first it comes down to that. It comes down to just designing more livable environments that can ontologically design how we get together. And within that, I really like the wireframe that Jamie Will does in Recapture the Rapture. He says that successful societies have a certain level of practice of ecstasis, catharsis, and communitas. Ecstasis are those peak experiences that we live together, either that be breathing or psychedelics or dancing together or going to church. Catharsis is all the process of healing together, is when we get together and we do like, healing together within the tribe or by yourself, doesn't matter, but like a constant practice. And then communitas is when we choose to do life together. And it's when we get together for the harvest or for praying on Sundays or for dancing on ecstatic dance. And all of those three things, I feel, is when you start reuniting the public with the private, and when even though you live your life and you have your thing, you're choosing to go and commune with others and build common spaces and take care of like the commons, which is also like our agreements in how we relate with our environments and what things are we building for everyone to enjoy. So you can always choose to be in your private thing, but you can also choose to go to the public and share it with others. And I don't know, maybe eventually the how we approach the private will change, although I doubt it because it's somehow comfortable and it allows you to not need to make so many agreements with so many people. And so I believe in that, in being able to choose when to opt in into larger environments, because as we've proven over years, it's even hard to have agreements in the private where you're choosing to share life with maybe one or two other people, your partner or like your close family, and even those are highly complicated. And so I think I imagine places where we can foster more experimentation at both and have a lot of catharsis and ecstasis so we can heal and mend whatever is going on, and we can imagine together and build new mythos together, which is what will inspire enough us to be willing to work on those things that are rough edges in our societies.
Totally. I just want to highlight something that Nico presented because it's such a misconception that village scenarios involve radical sharing of everything and no privacy. And what it actually is a reinventing of how we manage commons, how we treat private space, and the benefits of living close to people that you can rely on but not be forced to interact with. So that is something, going back to your original question, Tucker, that is actually uh, not what most people think it is and how it actually manifests in these community settings.
Beautiful, thank you. I think you both just did a really beautiful job of highlighting the like both sides of the coin that I experience in me, which is the one side, which is like, this is so simple. Like, let's just get a bunch of people we love and be in nature and make things beautiful and live in more harmony. And like humans have been doing this since we were, since we first existed on the planet. And so in a way, this is like deeply embedded in our bones and our DNA and our deepest structures of the psyche. And also, it's really complicated, or it can be really complicated. There can be complexity to it. And the human experience itself is very complex at times. And so how do we work together when there's conflict? And what are the different ways that we can orient? And how do we bring in people that have different worldviews or aspirations or perspectives on certain topics, whether it's what color the barn should be painted or what the entire, intention of the village itself is. And so how do we work with all of those different dynamics in a way that can also create more harmony? And so I think that you both just really beautifully painted sort of the both and that I often experience in myself. So I guess my question is, why don't either of you, as far as I know, neither of you and myself, we're not living at one of these regenerative eco villages at the moment. And so I guess my question is like, why don't they exist yet? And for the ones that do exist, why aren't we living there?
That's an excellent question. Why am I not living in an eco village yet? I think it's because not a lot exist, that I guess that, you know, are the ones that I would connect with at the deeper level. Because as you were saying, there was like a first wave of like eco villages and communes, etc., in the 60s, and a lot of them have carried over like the last few decades, and there's many communities. I guess they weren't, they weren't built by our friends, and so it's always hard to go and plug in into a place where you will give so much of yourself and so much of like it requires an effort into building with these people and making the extra effort of like living life with them. And I personally much rather do that with the people that I'm really close with. It seems like a lot of like emotional effort for something that, and I guess that's the reason why we're trying to build new ones, is just to maybe solve and mend some of the problems that we see in those, and to do it with people that we feel more kin. Although I'm sure that if we decided to live in any of these, and I know Nicole have for a long time, we will find, kindredness among them. Me personally, I don't think I have a true answer to this. It's just I think I'm waiting for the right one with the right people, and in the meantime, trying to just build them anew.
Yeah, riffing on that, I think there's about 3,500 to 4,000 documented eco villages all over the world. And of that, at Regen Tribe, we've databased about 280 plus regenerative villages. And out of that, there are only about 10 really interesting, really exciting, and truly innovative projects. And the numbers kind of speak for themselves when you're talking about options and variety. I think as a currently nomadic person, I've lived in community for a while, but then, I'm still continuing on to roam the earth to find a place that I want to settle and call home. There's always options for communities that I've enjoyed living in, but like somewhere that I see long term and truly connect with the vision, they don't exist yet. That's just the plain truth. And that's why it's such a leading edge space, because to be able to nail the design of these community spaces and community land projects so that they don't fail, because they have such a high failure rate that we're aware of, and we've seen it for many reasons. It's not knowing the process and not knowing the best practices. That's been a lot of our work consulting with different projects, because they just don't know, and being blinded to what you don't know, it will just lead to your demise. Part of it is, and we were kind of talking about this, and I think this is also true for Nico, is that, looking for one probably isn't going to be as effective as building one. And building one takes time. Designing it holistically, getting everyone on board, it's probably about a 10-year process to build a regenerative village. And Nico and I are collaborating to investigate and design and compile all of our tools, because we are constantly collecting resources, tools, and synthesizing our experience and our learnings into resources for people to learn how to do it in 3 years instead of 10. So it is a lengthy process. From recruiting people to building infrastructure to actually maintaining it long term so that it doesn't fall apart. And that's just the answer to it. Options and how much time it takes to build one of your own.
Yeah, I'm curious about that specifically. It feels like, especially post-COVID, or COVID was maybe a catalyst for this really hyper nomadic moment in time that we're in, our generation specifically. And it feels like there's this just this ability to be anywhere and still do our jobs and live our lives, and to just kind of keep hopping around the globe. And I wonder if that will create a new normal that might make it even more difficult for, say, someone to go from that lifestyle to then committing for 10 years to be in one place and to work with the same group of people, and to really dig into a project that might be a longer commitment than they've ever committed to anything in their lives before, and to some degree. And so, yeah, I'm curious about how you oriented that, and how can we sort of bridge or synthesize this possibility of being this global nomad that it seems that we have such beautiful access to, while also finding place, rooting in, and building locally at the same time. Are those possible to bridge?
I'll jump in. Like with anything, any project, any company, any government, the biggest problem and the biggest source of failure usually is people and relationships. Unfortunately, like projects can have all the resources and still fail because of the relationships that occur, or because of the the choices that the people that are leading those make. And so having been an entrepreneur for my entire life, and having founded 5 companies and being part of 3 more, and having seen a lot of other companies and a lot of like this sort of culture fail, and having seen how governments operate, et cetera, et cetera. My intuition tells me that even though our goal is to create villages that will ideally self-operate and operate like a town does, where there is a certain amount of governance that ideally is as democratic as possible, and that is the ultimate goal. My intuition is that to build such projects that require a lot of like decision making and funding and getting things off the ground and arranging new governance systems, even, or bringing in the right people, what is needed is smaller teams that are very committed to being able to build these things to a degree that is solid enough that then all the structures are in place. So eventually this can evolve into a more decentralized governance. Because oftentimes when we say, let's bring the villagers and build the village together, and it will still need some sort of leadership and somebody like kind of at least setting up the wireframes for that to happen. And I'm not saying it's impossible to do it the other way. There's thousands of examples of cooperatives and communes that were successful for however long. But to me, like I think the degree of failed projects that try, like the more opinions you bring in, the more complex it becomes, like any organism. And so my approach particularly has been to try to do a little bit more of like very dedicated, high profile level teams that can, because we're talking about like a random eco village that where you want 100 people to live in. Depends on how you approach it. You're talking about projects of millions of dollars and very complex structures with a lot of like contractors, and I'm not even talking about the personal part, which is again the most complex one. And so I think what we need to see this as is, in my personal opinion, is in the least naive, super optimistic, super cool looking, we get together and do the thing way. And I'm trying to do like more of the, let's look at it from like a more structural, professional, and if you want to say that, capitalistic way of doing, because that's the world that we live in and that's how things operate. And so how can we be sure that these structures are like as solid as possible so we can actually get the thing done? And while we do it, let's explore all the ways in which we can bring in all the people that are incredibly enthusiastic about doing this. And they might come for a year, or they might come for 10. As long as there is a team that is like taking the lead to solidify this and build it, then people can choose for how long to commit and to come. And hopefully once it's built, they will come and commit to living here because it feels like home and is where they want to be. But the structure needs to be very solid and not be relying on so much on people, because people are complicated.
Here. This is something I've definitely experienced. In response to living in a hyper-nomadic world, I've already developed this vision of having different, clubhouses in different places of the world, all connected, all part of the same community, whether it's the same humans or even just leveraging like franchise psychology to give a consistent experience and a sustainable option to live for travelers, but also for people who want to plant. I think when we're talking about nomadism, there's definitely differences in behavior across age, and that like, of course, young people are highly nomadic, very dynamic in the way that they live and move around a lot. But there will always have to be, I think, and what I've seen and what we've established is that there has to be people holding the torch in these village spaces for it to be what it is, and for it to not fall apart. Like, it's just same in a company. You don't want high turnover. It can't function that way. So we have examined like, okay, you need long-term people, and then but you also need to build the model of your village to welcome and properly integrate people who are short-term or just visiting guests, and considering everybody part of the community, but like the core community being very strongly held, is how I've seen communities continue to thrive. Other ones that we've worked with that were struggling specifically had that problem. And for me, like with Region Tribe, what we've been doing, we're like a nomadic collective. And for me, like, community is more so humans than space. It's just about building spaces that no matter where you go, you have the option to live in the most sustainable way possible, and an option to live in a very meaningful and intentionally designed physical space. So those are some things to consider, because what I intend to do is, my full dream is to incept people who are going to buy a house anyways. Why not do it in a neighborhood or a community where they know their neighbor, and there's some shared community amenities? It's really, we as like people who are deep in this movement are like so radical about it, but it doesn't have to be or manifest in a radical way. To me, it's like the logical next step of home ownership or living in spaces. It's like an emergent response to the hyper disconnection, and that, oh yeah, I want to know and trust the people that I share space with. I want children, or of our families, to be able to raise their children in places where they can trust the food that they're eating, and they are very confident in their ecological impact, and because they're living in a space that's designed sustainably. It's like, it's so simple, really, to me. Like, if you remove, of course, all the complexity it takes to get there, but what it represents to me is like very simple concepts that, of course, like nodding to it will, yeah, not to understate the complexity, especially the human element. This is part of what we've been researching alongside the very technical aspects. Because you can really, like, it's just a box at like, the infrastructure is just a box, but like the actual feeling of community and getting people to live together harmoniously is the thing we've been trying to figure out since like the dawn of humanity. It's like, okay, we might be naturally very peaceful, but we also have had to learn how to live harmoniously and resolve conflict in new ways. And we have a lot of social technologies available to us at the moment, new frameworks, old frameworks, and just like the amount of knowledge available to us when it comes to actually building these spaces is astounding. And this is why it's like so exciting and just like riveting for me to be part of this space.
Yeah, awesome. When you both were speaking, I was just reflecting on Airbnb. And when Airbnb first started, it sort of had this idea of like, you could travel to anywhere in the world and you could have that feeling of being at home. You're in someone else's home, but it's still the feeling of being at home. And often you would, back in the old Airbnb days, you would live with the person that lives in the home, and then you would share a room with them. And what I've experienced over time, I've used Airbnb hundreds of times now at this point, and it's most often now just a way to rent out your house, and you go and it feels pretty sterile, and all the personal items are put away, and you can tell that it's like more or less a hotel room. And it's very rare that the actual homeowner will live there. Most of the time, if it's a shared room, it's shared with other Airbnb guests, so it has like a hostel feel. And Yeah, I'm just sensing into the possibility for this network of communities that are around the globe that have this feeling of being in that field, in that energetic field, where it feels like, oh, I'm dropping in with people that have shared values. There's some sense of alignment. There's some sense of a ecological integration with nature that feels like a sense of being at home in this new ancient way of being. And my concern, and when I think about projects like Nuanu, which I worked on in Bali, and some of the ones that are growing really fast, and when they get kind of swept up, I'm not saying that Nuanu is falling into this trap, but it's a concern I have for 5-10 years down the road, is if it kind of gets swept up into the capitalistic structure, that it will turn into essentially like a glorified Instagram Airbnb experience that doesn't actually have like the heart and soul that was originally there, and the intention and the building and the original process kind of woos itself to this money making kind of quick fix establishment. Yeah, so I guess I'm naming that as it's something that I've been reflecting on the past couple of years, is visiting some of these places that are trying to bring in sort of the old structures and models and principles of startup culture and entrepreneurship. And it feels like such a tricky, potentially slippery slope. Nico, I'm just curious if you have anything to share on that.
And I was like reflecting upon what I said and the conflicts that I feel within myself, right? And on the one hand, so for example, if you take a company, right? It's all about establishing protection mechanisms, right? And so the way a company structure, you have the officers, right? The CEO, the whatever, which are usually also the founders, at least at the beginning, where they might own the company, but they are also hired by the company to operate. But they need, even the CEO has a lot of power, it still needs to respond to a board that is usually composed of the founders and the investors. And when the companies grow, other people that whose job is to keep the people running the thing accountable. Funny enough, this is something, for example, we don't have for government. We do have the officers, you have the president and the parties. We don't have the accountability that they have is the other parties and people voting, so they can kick them out if they're not doing a good job. So you might say that is something similar. But ultimately, what you're doing here is, and the problem is, more often than not, the board that can, kick out the people are in companies is just like the investors. So the money ends up talking. In a society, you have democracy where people can kick people out that are not doing a good job, but you only do that once every 4 years, and you need to, fuck it up big time to be kicked out. And so we're lacking all these mechanisms, and also they're not very human. They end up you end up establishing all these like not represented by humans, but like corporate structures to protect the structure itself. And on the one hand, I have a conflict for that because it's efficient in a way and it protects the structure, but it doesn't account for people. Like we're dehumanizing the structures and like removing the human factor as much as we can because it's the most complex one. Once again, like the human component of it is always the most complex and the most difficult to deal with, and the one that we have least tools for, which is a fascinating component. And I think capitalism as a financial and organizational social system is not wrong per se. The problem is the incentives, right? It's like, what are we incentivizing with the structures? And Daniel Schmattenberger puts it really well. He says, like, if a whale is worth a billion or $1 million on dead on top of a ship to be sold and it's worth zero alive in the ocean, we're just setting up the wrong incentives. And so how can we have societies where, like, you can have capitalism as a system of organization or financial exchange, but we need to also incorporate the human systems, the human values, the values in which protecting land and nature and fostering humanness is as valuable as the rental of a space. Because otherwise what you get is gentrification of cities and all the things that we already know that capitalism is causing. And so I think there is a very interesting dialogue there in what we consider the commons, which are the things that we are going to build that don't need to be capitalize, that we're just building them for the sake of building them and for fostering life and for being nourishing to everyone. And what are the things that we're protecting? Like what happens when you say these trees were not cutting? Doesn't matter if we could cut and make money off. We're not cutting. And so it's very difficult because within this come sacrifices. And we have superstructures like governments or nations or hyper nations like the European Union that are committed to protecting the commons, then that works. But like once that goes, once those decisions goes into the individual, then it becomes trickier. So for example, if you're building a village, how much of the land that you bought are you protecting? And in which ways? And with the things that you're building, who are you building them for? And are you being sure that like the super rich guy can buy your super awesome amazing premium apartment that you're building or home, but that there is also a home that is available to a less wealthy person? And so to me, like it all comes down to ethics and morals and trying to account for as many people as possible, but that comes with compromises, and is that leveling is very hard living in the capitalistic society that we live in. And so I think it's a constant dialogue. It needs to be a dialogue where we bring it up as you're bringing it up, and we constantly question ourselves. And when I was saying like we need core team leads that will go and do the thing and like just like get it done, at the same time I'm like, yeah, but like how can we also manage to make this in a way that is inclusive and where like everybody can have voice and where like we account for everybody and not leave anybody behind? And it's a constant learning and a constant practice, and we need constant reminders of it.
Yeah, well said. That also is bringing up another polarity, you could say, around diversity versus curation, or openness versus curation. And I've been doing a number of community experiments and gatherings over the past year and a half or so, and I've opted for this is after several years of visiting many different intentional communities that were basically more or less had open doors to whoever wanted to be there and whoever wanted to join. And what I found was that sometimes that radical openness was some of the most beautiful like aspects of that community, and it really had this sense of feeling like welcoming in a way that very, very few other structures or places in the modern world offer. And at the same time, there was sort of a tendency to maybe attract in people that were feeling some sort of like we're feeling maybe a little bit lost, or we're feeling like they really wanted to like find a place where they could kind of like grab onto. And there was almost a sense of codependency, and it would bring up people's shadows, and it would kind of lead to a lot of emotional processing and conflict resolution and all that stuff. And so I sort of, for the gatherings I was doing, I was like, I'm going to opt for the opposite direction and have it be highly curated and have it come like through me specifically, and I'll be the gatekeeper, and I'm not going to apologize for that. And basically, if like we're still trying to figure out how to live together in new ways, I want to make it, I want to have like the easiest playing field as possible. So we all have more or less a shared worldview. We all have more or less a shared language or a shared orientation to similar aspects of life. And even within that homogeneity, there was still so much diversity and so much complexity and so much, so many differences essentially that were constantly clashing up against each other. So yeah, that's just another thing I've been thinking about, is when you all are speaking about like bringing in, kind of making it a small team that have a lot of experience and a lot of expertise in certain areas, and then opening it up. But then also, how do we kind of curate who's allowed, or not allowed, but like who comes in as a first wave or a second wave or a third wave of actually grounding and building the community, and how do those people and their own desires and their own aspirations and perspectives end up shaping the culture of the place that will then determine, how it might be for decades to come potentially. And so like I guess how are you both orienting around that, around the finding the people that you're attracted to not only be on the core team, but then also to bring into the collective, knowing that they'll in large part shape the culture. And once that culture is shaped, it's might be more difficult than easy to actually, pivot from in the future once there's already sort of an established way of being that's somewhat in the ethos?
Yeah, so I think let's be honest, because a common criticism of even rustic eco villages, but obviously too like $1 million projects, building regenerative spaces, is that they're not economically accessible to many, and then by extension not socially accessible or welcoming. Like it's not easy to participate. Relocation, for example, is not an option for some. Working remotely is not an option for some. And for me, grounding this conversation into the context of like, what can we as village designers do to mitigate that, comes in a variety of ways. And I have done some investigations on this. Nico touched on it in that one way to do this is to offer a variety of housing. It mirrors the way city planners are supposed to integrate affordable housing in different zonings, which they don't always uphold. But essentially, you should always have like a mixed a way for people to live in your community, and also based on like inviting people in to be co-founders, a mixed variety of how people can contribute. Some people will have a lot of time. Some people will not have a lot of time. Some people will be able to be on site or to put up a lot of capital to help fund the project. Other people will be willing to show up on site and do physical labor or trade services and earn sweat equity. Offering many different avenues for people to join, with also special considerations for how people who are marginalized or disadvantaged will be able to take part. And this also is sometimes addressed in communities that, for example, are specifically open to people with disabilities, or specifically a community that is targeted towards a certain like marginalized group of people. But when we're building this, we're not trying to marginalize again in their own community. It's like the integration aspect. So personally, I write about something I call the community membrane, which is a level of curation while also a level of openness, and that you can allow people to get involved in your community in stages and over time, because just throwing your doors open and saying we want everyone is a recipe for disaster. But also being too guarded actually causes you to stagnate and prevents intergenerational leadership. Like diversity, equity, and inclusion is severely sabotaged in that way. You limit neurodivergence, like the whole gamut. So striking that balance is key, I think. And I'm not going to say that I've completely figured it out. We've prototyped different onboarding and offboarding processes for communities, but essentially when you're building a project, you also need to be very realistic about who is ready at their stage of life. Like some people will only be able to come once it's ready and built, and not like fostering hope in people, but still designing and keeping in mind those people, and that and some people find it controversial, but like retroactively designing against like economic disparity and historical inequality. I have no problem designing a community that like takes in like very specific consideration certain people who have been historically marginalized or disadvantaged, and then on that topic as well, thinking about inclusivity and context and local context, and like connecting and having positive impact wherever you choose to situate your regenerative village is paramount, because it's not just about creating a little bubble of like we get to enjoy our little slice of paradise, but that you have like a significant positive impact with local organizations, with local government, and that you're actively working so that, you know, all the innovation can actually ripple out. So some ways to make it more inclusive, I found, involve both like language, like if you're in a multilingual setting, offering experiences and documentation in multiple languages really furthers your mission. And then also culturally, being sensitive to how people want to be involved and what their options are, and meeting those needs without, I mean, let's be straight up. I've definitely seen some interesting neo-colonial practices in people just taking an expensive project to a third world country and then building it out and kind of having their slice of paradise because the land was really cheap in another country. So that's something like I think we need to constantly talk really open about because we don't have the answers and there are a lot of gaps, but we're working to find ways to avoid that and integrate what we know is what we really want, a very diverse and healthy population of people.
Yeah, I want to add something thank you, Nicole, for all that. That's enlightening and I think so true. And I think, ultimately, the problem is we're still talking at small scale, right? So we're talking about the 1 to 5, eco-villages that we're going to be building. But eventually the idea is this can expand as a concept. And so it's complicated because, even in when we were organizing in tribes, and I know that, even that term is complex, and like, what is a tribe and like, what are we trying to achieve when we say like, I'm meeting with my tribe? But ultimately, what humans have done for the biggest amount of time is try to get together with others that they feel culturally attuned to. And I think it all comes down to that mythos that we're talking about, is that when you have a shared mythology, a shared idea, shared principles, then it becomes easier. And then it doesn't matter the color of your skin or your religion or whatever else, is like you need to feel that kindredness. And I think more and more, like, we live in a world that is more diverse, where diversity is more accepted, as long as what we're discovering is that what we need is to have those shared values and principles. And so, I don't think we need to build communities that are for everyone. I think what we need is to build templates that communities that are culturally attuned can use to build their own. And so for now, what we can do is share these templates that we're trying to build. Eventually, in a world that I imagine, whatever form or shape governments take, it will be providing resources so communities can like tend for themselves and organize better. And that's where, like, the same way that you have neighborhoods in cities that are somehow culturally attuned, and that's why you have, whatever. For now, we've done that through nations, and so, like, you have the Italian neighborhood and you have the whatever neighborhood, and so how can we empower those people that want to just that have something in common to build better and to build either neighborhoods or villages or whatever it is that we are doing, to build it in a way that we can foster more livability and more ritual together and more communitas and all these things. And I think that's when you can start scaling it up. And then, obviously, ideally, each community can be open to anybody that want to come, regardless of their skin color or their age or their whatever, as long as they are culturally attuned. So I think that is what keeps the community together.
Nice. Well, I want to ask about the mastermind that you both are creating coming up, and maybe a bridge question into that topic is, I'm curious, for those that are listening and they're totally on board, they're like, I most definitely want to live or help create something like this. I have hundreds and hundreds of conversations, it feels like, a month about this topic, and it seems like more and more people are sort of on board with the idea, conceptually at least, even if they have had limited experience visiting some of these places in person. What would you say, given that there's going to be most likely this even larger, ever-growing, expanding wave of excitement that is fostering and like cultivating this movement? What are maybe some of the risk in that, or the downsides, or potentially like some of the easy ways that people can get stuck or fall into traps or repeat old patterns that aren't working, and how will your mastermind potentially help people navigate those types of common pitfalls, perhaps is the way to put it? And maybe just to clarify my question, I guess, is when when I feel like culturally, broadly in society, there's a lot of excitement about something that can be such a beautiful thing, but it can also come with its own risk. And I just wanted to name that and feel that I have some, there's something in me that wants to protect the preciousness and almost the fragility of this, while also recognizing the sense of urgency and that the moment has come, perhaps in some way, to really fully go towards this collective vision that we're all holding.
I'll start by just outlining a really common scenario, and that, just like you said, someone discovers it, they're totally on board, they get really excited, they go out and buy the first land that they can find, and then they hit a wall. And there are a lot of walls that we've identified in this really complex process, whether it's legal issues or like not properly forming a business plan, not knowing where to source your services from, having like poor experiences with people that you do work with and pay a lot, having no prior knowledge about the type of land you should be looking for, or the legal permissions in that. There's like very highly technical aspects of it. And then of course there's like having a very clear vision, having a plan for how to recruit community members in a way that, you know, you're sharing. And there are like various approaches to how to do this, but like, and most of it is non-linear, as we've been exploring in designing this mastermind. But essentially identifying all of these blocks that people commonly run into, like they built the place and it's this gorgeous community in the jungle, but no one's coming, or no one's interested, or they've run out of budget, and now like they shouldn't have been building a tantric temple, they should have been building like short-term places to stay so that people could be on site. There's a lot of common challenges and common pitfalls, typically around either like money, lack of technical knowledge, or a failure of relationship and breakdown in that sense. So those are some of the things that we want to address, because if we can address those, people can build them, and then they will succeed into the future and not fall apart in like the first 3 years.
I was imagining, just trying to find an answer to your question. I was imagining, you know, a healthy person that has like a 20-something, is a healthy young adult, has been raised by lovely parents. And so if you backtrack of like how you got there, and you go back like 20-something years, what you needed is first like two people with some sort of chemistry between each other that at some point decided to have a common goal. And then you have this thing that is incredibly rare, that is life, and it's like out of millions of tries of like sperm, one might get to, you know, fecund the woman, and then for that child to be born, it's like 9 months of like chance and a lot of fucking things that can go wrong. And so the only thing that you can do within that process is just like try to tend to luck and to putting together the, you know, best possible circumstances for things to just run their course. And then you need to do a fucking lot of work to remain together as a couple and like give this child a good education, and hopefully he'll, you know, be born healthy and be raised in a healthy way. And the sheer amount of like chance that is in that process is like outstanding. Just now multiply that by a billion to make a village, right? And so can we like protect or we can do some things. We can try to learn from, you know, who did it previously. We can try to put in as many tools as we can. It will most likely be chance, and 1 out of 1,000 will succeed and the rest will fail. And the only thing we can do is try to share as much as we can of the process, so more of them have more chances of like learning from previous mistakes, and put together the right people. And that is always, again, chance, and it's difficult. And so I don't think there's an answer to your question. Can we do it? I don't think we can. We can just do our best and keep trying, and hopefully more people will try, and so we'll have more chances of more of these things being born, and that's it. So I think, you know, in the mastermind that we're trying to put together, At the beginning, we were like, what is our curriculum? And like, let's like outline this thing and put it into an amazing website and people will come. And then we're like, but like there's so many diverse options of people that are doing in so many different ways, and is there one way to do it, and is this the right way? And so we've decided to take a slightly more organic, I think, a biologically organic approach. And so we're like, what is our goal? Our goal is like for the next, in the next 10 years or 5 years, for at least 5 or 10 of these villages to be built successfully, so they can be in, they can show others what not to do and what to do or try to do, and then just trust their luck. There's a lot of extraordinary humans giving a try to this. What can we do? We can put them in common. We can make, instead of these being like a curriculum with classes, it can be more of like an incubator project where we are gonna select and try to get on board the people that we feel are closer to it. As Nicole was saying, like out of the thousands of villages, we've narrowed it down to like 280 that are actually doing the thing. And then out of those, there are 10 that are like, this might be it. And so let's get these people together and let's try to give them as many resources as we can. And let's try to bring in all the people that have made mistakes and or made the right decisions to share their experience. And through what we think is an outline of how a village could potentially be built, just give them as many resources as we can, both in people, in templates, in consultations with these friends that are doing the same thing. And then let's also let them talk and share their process and what they're doing and how they're coming up with solutions. So we amplify the possibilities of them succeeding. And that's what the mastermind is. It's just like a try at like getting together everybody that is actually doing and giving them as many platforms as we can for them to do what they're doing. Will we succeed? I think it's going to be mostly based on luck.
Yeah, all of that and more. It's been a process since I think it was first suggested the idea. I attended or Rebuild's design sprints specifically on this purpose of master planning a regenerative village. And one of the key takeaways is that the curriculum needed so much more space because there was so much to cover because it's a high complexity topic. And the concept that came out of that is we want to bring people together in person, and we want to build, a world-class course that explores these topics, sourcing from the wisdom of people who have done it, sourcing from different tools that we've collected along the way, and at the same time just sitting down with people and literally masterminding their project. Having done both an eco-village design education a few years ago, there was so much more I was craving, and I knew that there was, it felt like such a 101 course, and I was like, where's the masters in regenerative village design? And really that's the aim of this. Of course, it's in its very initial stages, but we want to be able to develop this at a high level of educational university level curriculum to be able to disseminate this. But we're starting by working very closely and building a cohort of people who are promising village projects that want to up level. They have a highly developed concept, and we just want to infuse them with like all the tools, and prepare them so much because if they're prepared, they're less likely to fail. They're less likely to be just subject to chance. And we can't guarantee anything, but that's like our goal. We want to see more places where people can live and people can actually thrive. So I'm so grateful. We have a pretty awesome design team at the moment. They feel like they're such a delight to work with. Nico, of course, included. And yeah, we're really kind of in this stage where we're going to be doing some deeper market research and reaching out to people to see to add an element of co-creation to the curriculum to really customize it and make sure we're addressing people's needs versus giving them what we think they need or want. And that's the process that we're in, since we've outlined quite extensively what the offering could be and what it could look like. We're in this moment of identifying the best vehicle for that information to be absorbed by the people who will be participating.
Yeah. And there's like three things that I want to say simultaneously, so I'll just pick one, which is that when you were talking, you know, sometimes when people, I have a documentary film background as is Nico, I believe, and sometimes people come and they're like, oh, I had this documentary film idea and I want to make it, and sometimes I say to them in a loving way, I'm like, you know, there's a really good chance that no one will watch it, because like there's thousands and thousands of documentary films that are made a year, and there's maybe 3, 4, 5, 7 that actually get like some major publicity and are seen by the general public in some significant way. And but I say, like, do you want to make this documentary because it might not change the world in that classical sense of the saying, but it will definitely change your world. And even if you go and you make it and it never even gets edited, or you make it and, you know, you show it to your close friends and in your community, or it plays at a very small local film festival, like that's still going to completely change your life. And if your soul is passionate about it, then that's adding beauty and love into the world. And so there's a way in which like it might be a failure in the sense that it's not featured on Netflix and up for an Academy Award, but it's still having a significant impact on that person's life, which ultimately just ripples out infinitely into all of life. So, and just having kind of a mirrored, you guys are, when you're speaking about Regenerative Village, it seems like there's sort of a mirrored thing there of like a lot of people are going into this like gung-ho and with a lot of excitement and you know, maybe making projects that are on some level failing, but there are also immense learning opportunities, and like all that learning and wisdom is getting poured now into your mastermind, which you can then, you know, recycle back out into wisdom that others can learn and grow from, and it can help the process and lift all the tide lifts all boats, whatever that saying is, you know what I mean. I'm curious, just practically speaking, when will the mastermind be and where will it be and how can people find out more? Yeah, I'll just throw that to you first.
Nicole, that's yours. Go for it.
Yeah, so we actually had it originally scheduled for this April, and we were like, no, let's create it at a regenerative pace, because I do believe that the way that we create thing is just as important as the thing that we create. And so we've rescheduled it for October. It's set to be in Mexico and Tulum area, at half hosted at a jungle campus called Paladora, and then half hosted at a sustainable micro city in the jungle called Cuyave. So we're still in the space of redefining the curriculum based on our insights, our introspections about the best way to do this. And of course, even those things are subject to change. I'm very much like, as someone who goes based on not forcing, but allowing. And for people who want to track the progress, villagemastermind.com is the way to go to sign up, just with an email to get updates, and also be able to receive the form that will allow you to engage in co-creating their curriculum and telling us what stage you're at in your journey of village building, and also request things that are burning desires that you want to see be taught. So all of that will be available at that website. And also just like talking to us. I hope I'm like a very personal person, so I'm available to be messaged on different platforms. Yeah, any other questions that you have, practically speaking, about the experience?
Cool. And then I just have to ask this because I imagine, well, I'm a little curious, but also I imagine that people are curious when they're listening to this. And when you said like, oh, there's 10 examples of places in the world that might be doing the thing, what are the maybe 2 or 3 for each of you that feel like they really light you up, and that maybe you would recommend people go and visit? You know, if they have time this summer, for example, they have a month and they want to go visit a project that's out there in the world, what are 2 or 3 examples that you are personally drawn to and might point people towards?
It's a complicated question. Uh, um, you know, there are like the historical villages that have done so much and are so fascinating to go and study, but have so many caveats as well. And especially like for example, I'm thinking of Oroville, like one that I've used as an example many times, and that I know now for a fact that is collapsing and having tons of problems and it's like just going through some and it's surprising that it's being the size they are and doing the things they've done that they've survived for so long without that many problems. But now it's like it's tricky. But maybe it's the best time to go and learn from the things that, you know, might have done or could have done differently. Um, I think of um, I think of Brave Earth, even though it's not yet fully a living community, even though they're working towards it. But I really like the thinking and philosophy behind it. And if you have a chance to see or listen to Al-Noor talking about anything on any stage is enlightening always, because I think it has a very deep perspective of, like, you know, he talks a lot about capitalism and like the things that could be mended and reshaped. I really like the thinking behind Future Thinkers Village. I really appreciate their brains, even though the village is going at a slower pace they thought, and they're still like in the very, very, very early stages. But I really like their brains as well. And and then I'm sure Nicole can give a bunch of examples of Tulum. I haven't explored that much, but like you guys have done a lot of research, and I'm sure you have like at least 3 or 4 examples of like people actually doing the thing.
Yeah, so also like what Nico said, in that there are some of the OG projects which are, worth visiting. You can learn a lot from them. They're probably a bit more on like the hippie holistic side, but they've like nailed the human aspect of like being able to relate, being able to function for 30 plus years, which like alone is like quite impressive. But most of them are like facing a kind of impasse of intergenerational struggles. But there are some like interesting new projects emerging, and that like infrastructurally might not be so impressive, but like ideologically are really impressive. And for me, the ones in Europe would be ones like La Matriz at La Requipus, which is like a campus within a community that is teaching how to build, like regenerative villages, and also hosting events and conferences on this area. Obviously, traditional Dream Factory in Portugal is considered. Yeah, Nico's connected through Rebuild to the founder of TDF, and that's considered one of the forerunners, at least in like the refi space of like, this is, a token-based community land project. And there are some other ones that are emerging, like that are just like more cool alternative places to live, like Chateau de Fay. It kind of represents the larger movement in Europe of like people purchasing giant castles and turning them into co-housing and co-living. In like Central America and South America, there's a really interesting development, La Ecovia, which has like, it's a more family-oriented community, but it's been able to replicate its model 3 times, which is like unheard of to me. And that it has, 3 locations. They're all intentional, sustainable communities, but they've been able to like very procedurally approach the concept of building more sustainable places to live in Costa Rica. There's a lot, like there's like Liminal Village in Italy. I think we both share the sentiment that, like, for me, La Tierra is the only vision that I've seen that like I would actually want to live in. But the problem is that like with like many projects that are the most exciting, regen villages, next gen village, those are all still in the creation phase. And so we're waiting for them, to come along and to be lived in. And there are other initiatives to connect to. I think of like Cohere and Cabin in particular, because they're building the model of like different like sustainable properties that are accessible through like citizenship. So that kind of goes into they have like network neighborhoods, or they're building network neighborhoods in the case of Cohere, where Cabin is like just taking properties and kind of like the Airbnb model, where they're like, hey, put your property into our network and like you can just leave it. But that way they're leveraging this concept of like existing infrastructure, which is something that we kind of tend to recommend places that we consult, is like, when you're looking for land, it's a win if you can find something with existing infrastructure. And then there's also the Free Cities movement. And one of the locations some of my team members are at right now, it's called Prospera in Honduras. They're doing like a 200-person co-live currently with a forming community of humans called Vitalia. They're like really interested in biotech longevity. So like, how do we live longer together? And this is to me one of the exciting parts of like intentional community, in that you can surround yourself with people who reinforce your best self and reinforce your positive habits, and collectively you get to live like a super thriving, like healthy life. So that's kind of like, those are some projects on my mind. There's a ton others that like are still just kind of forming. There's the that are really interesting, that also are turning around and teaching, like future thinkers, like the guys from Living Off Grid Dream, and Acorn Land Labs is really interesting. They're building like a simulator where you can like drag and drop little sustainable infrastructure and know how much it costs, and like be able to know how much the maintenance will also cost you over time. Like, people are doing really cool stuff and building really interesting tools. So it's fun to be in that time where like we're leveraging technology rather than running away from it. But the sad answer is like, none that I would live in right now. Ones that I would visit, but none that I would live in.
Yeah, same. So I think my last question, unless there's anything else you'd like to add before we wrap, is about La Tierra specifically, and maybe it's La Tierra the project, but more so La Tierra as it lives as a vision or a dream in your hearts and your minds. What is it about that feels different, that draws you in, that might be taking a different approach? And yeah, what's like a dream that you can leave viewers with as a possibility for the future?
One of the things that I appreciate the most about one of the ideas that came up during the process of conceptualizing La Tierra is what we ended up calling the village of villages, which I think is one of the reasons that is unique. The village of villages was, and it's something that came up because I think La Tierra started with very specific land that we ended up not being able to cut a deal with the landowner. But it started with a land that was much bigger than what we envisioned originally for La Tierra as a concept. It was almost like 4 times bigger. It was a very beautiful piece of land in Costa Rica, 430 acres. And at some point, we're like, whoa, we have all this land. And the reality is there is all these amazing communities that are shifting from having been communities over the last 10 years and having met together in festivals or retreats or environments, and they're all wanting the same and all shifting to just wanting to ground in place. And so you have a bunch of these eco-village projects are born out of communities already. And I think that's incredibly powerful because it starts with the most difficult part, which is what we were saying. It's like it's a common idea or a common mythos or a common whatever belief that will get these people together for either living or doing life together. And so the idea of the village of villages was that we were gonna facilitate to all these communities that have no idea whatsoever how to build things or work with architects or do due diligences or go and cut a deal for land, that we were going to buy enough land and then give them all the resources they needed to just fundraise on their own, but then help them build their own communities. And so we would end up having this sort of town where you have neighborhoods, and some neighborhoods are theme, and in a city you get these by again nations, and you might have Chinatown or Little Italy, but what if we were to do this by passions, and you know, you have the meditation village, and you have the circus people like Momentum that are, like, love to do their circus thing, and you have the whatever it is that is getting people together emotionally, and as a like an ideal of what they want to be and who they want to do life with. And so I love this vision of creating a village of villages where you have a lot of, and a village can be a very tiny one. It could be your 8 friends that you want to retire with because you have a share like something, or it could be 100 people village that is themed around something that people are really passionate about. And it's beautiful if you put them all together. That's how they will start like interacting with each other. And I'm gonna say this exists already. It's called Burning Man, and you know, it's built by camps that are thematically oriented, and where we go and build our own little village for a week, and we share our resources, and we give people food, and we share with our neighbors, and you have like neighborhoods that are a theme, and you know that, you know, you go here for music and you go there for like this other thing, and then we all coexist together for a week. And so let's think how we can do this more permanently. And I think that's one of the, you know, La Tierra has been highly inspired by Burning Man in both principles and how it's built. And so that's what I think excited about, like creating more broader neighborhoods.
Beautiful.
I think that, you know, like a parting sentiment that I want to share is just that if the goal is to live more sustainably or more regeneratively, it's just easier to do it together. And whether that's in like a small space with a few friends, or a large scale village, 100%, like it just is much more accessible, I feel, than we think. It feels very far off in the future where these projects will be more commonplace. But that's kind of the role that we want to take, is accelerating the journey and the availability of regenerative villages without necessarily compromising the integrity of them. And I think like for anyone, like living in community now is one way to start like developing those muscles of understanding just how beautiful and medicinal sharing space with people in a cooperative way can be. And yeah, I feel very grateful for the journey so far. And I'm super excited to see what's going to come out in the next decade. I think in the next decade, there's going to be quite a lot of really innovative next generation projects as funds are being developed. That's one thing that like we're collaborating on with a partner project, is like, okay, like how can we act as an accelerator and divert funding to these projects, as well as like changing how, like infiltrating a certain class of people with a certain amount of capital in order to reallocate that into building these types of spaces, is kind of one of the missions that I have, and that we're working on with this concept of startup society. So yeah, I feel really inspired by knowing that there are other people out there working actively on village design, and I'm looking forward to what comes next.
Me too. I agree. I would bet everything that I could possibly bet on the fact that the next 10 years are going to be just a flourishing of the regenerative village movement, and that there'll be projects popping up all over the place, experiments and prototypes, and it's going to be like this massive garden with, you know, some weeds and some challenges and some floods maybe that come and set the whole thing back, but also a lot of beautiful colors and medicinal properties that can come from that which grows. And I'm just super excited for the future, and really grateful for the two of you and for all of us doing our parts to make that beautiful world our reality. So celebrating you both, and thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. It was really fun, and your questions are very on point. They're very appreciated the way you see things. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for creating a space to share this information and share these messages.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right. Much love to you both. Ciao. Bye.
Ciao.